Thank you so much for coming to this panel. We're so excited to spend the next hour and 15 minutes with you. We have a packed schedule. My name is Marina Walker Guevara. I am executive editor at the Pulitzer Center. It's an organization that supports global enterprise journalism, and we also manage networks of reporting collaborations, including a network on AI accountability. And that's how I got to know these fantastic speakers that are going to share with you today everything they know, everything they wish they had known and somebody had told them when they started reporting on AI. They are incredible professionals, and they are also some of the most generous people I know in the business. And one of the things that we want to do today is to demystify who gets to be an AI reporter. And the answer to that is all of you. This is not a story that should be put to the tech desk. This is not just a business story. This is much more of an accountability and a political story. And just like we say, everybody should be a climate reporter because we can't afford otherwise. Everybody should be an AI reporter because AI is already transforming or has already transformed your beat, whether you cover courts, police, health, social welfare, the environment, and more. So let's demystify that and go ahead with these presentations. Please keep your questions in mind, write them down, because we're going to have time for Q&A. I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists, and then we'll get started. So to my left is Garance Berg, who is the global investigative reporter with the Associated Press. Gabriel Geiger is an investigative reporter with Lighthouse Reports. And Lim Tu Thuy Vo is an investigative reporter with the Markup in the US and also an associate professor at the City University of New York. And what we thought we would do is to get started with some definitions. You hear all these terms, in artificial intelligence, algorithms, large language models, and sometimes it can be a soup, and we would love for to kind of like set a baseline, so when these terms come up in the presentation, we're all on the same page. And also precision is really important in the coverage of this story. So Lam, go ahead to Professor Lam.
Hi, nice to meet you all. Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that AI has been around for a long time. Now it's being hyped a lot because we have large language models, ChatGPT, all of these interesting terms that have been thrown at you, especially in the past 3 months. And so we figured it might be helpful to understand the workflow of how these algorithms and AI mechanisms work, just to be able to better understand where we as investigative reporters can plug in, right? And so in essence, most AI works in this way. You have inputs or training data, so massive amounts of data. For ChatGPT, that could be a lot of text all from around the internet, right? For something like an image generator, it could be a bunch of photos. And for other algorithms, like the ones that my peer here reviewed that make risk scores about people, those might be statistics and other data sources that are pulled together. But just imagine there's a bunch of data that then goes through a model or an algorithm that analyzes trends and anomalies that it finds in there, and through a set of instructions that a technologist gave it, will make an output. That could be a prediction, whether someone should deserve welfare or not. There could be evaluative scores, whether they're of risk of being of recidivism risks. There could be a new image, like the Pope in this wonderful jacket, or it could just be a prediction of how accurate, like a picture, whether there's a cat in the picture with 95% confidence. So that's generally the workflow. Secondly, I wanted to give you a few understandings of words that you might have heard, and say that an algorithm is a series of steps or a set of rules for solving or performing a task. That is what it is. Sometimes I liken it to a recipe. One step after another, after another, after another. You give it data and it goes through those particular steps. There's artificial intelligence. That's the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. So I will make a decision on whether someone deserves welfare or not based on these algorithms, right? This artificial intelligence. There's machine learning, which is a branch of artificial intelligence in which computer generates rules and predictions based on raw data that has been fed into it. And then the sexy new parts of AI, large language models, natural language processing tools, basically tools that are used to look at language and that have ingested massive amounts of text from the internet to look for patterns, and then that they will mimic back to you. Some people call large language models ChatGPT parrots because they literally parrot the styles and the ways in which we talk, even though they don't know how to distinguish between fact and fiction. And last but not least, generative AI, which you have seen in the realm of images, is a type of technology that can produce content including text, imagery, and audio. I don't know if anyone is a fan of Drake, but if you saw a few months ago, there was a new Drake song that was entirely made of AI, and that was quite interesting. It was actually quite catchy, but yes. Hopefully all of this will be helpful to you. We won't be talking as much about the new the hipster AI, which is large language models, and generative AI, but you now have a better understanding of the umbrella that the term AI also entails.
Thank you so much, Professor Tuivaux. And I think that the other good news is that the Associated Press just published an updated section or a new section in their style manual that I'm sure you all know, and it's specifically about AI reporting and provides definitions for these terms and also advice on how to approach this topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of our big takeaways that we want you to come out of this panel with is that you all have the street smarts and the experience as investigative reporters to delve into this area of journalism. And so I'll talk a little bit about the AP style book in a minute, but first I'm going to tell you about an investigation that my colleagues and I did last year as part of a series that we put together called Tracked. And this series looked particularly at specific kinds of tools, predictive and surveillance tools, and their presence in a variety of different policy arenas around the globe. So I work at the AP. We're a huge organization with colleagues around the world in 250 locations. And not everyone has a passion or an aptitude for data science particularly, right? But nonetheless, we were able to pull together an amazing team, a cross-format team of colleagues in photo, video, data, and print to tell some really deep dives on these technologies. So I'll just highlight one because it's global. And what's important about it as well is it's particularly visual, and it's also aimed at demystifying these technologies in part through focusing on the human beings who are impacted by these surveillance tools. So there are other stories that we did in this Tracked series that are a bit nerdier and that go into some of the training data and that, like Gabriel's story, unpack the variables and the weights that are used in algorithms to make decisions about children and families. But with this particular story, we wanted to show that global sweep of how surveillance technologies that were put into place during the COVID-19 pandemic were then repurposed for other means, you know, to surveil activists, to harass marginalized communities, means that none of us had ever predicted when we decided to give our governments our data in the hope of stopping the pandemic. So in the pandemic's early days, millions of us thought that government officials were going to use this data to help halt coronavirus's spread. But actually what happened is governments got this fire hose of all of our very intimate details, right? Our photographs that captured our facial measurements, our temperatures, our addresses, And what we found is from Beijing to Jerusalem to Hyderabad, India, and Perth, Australia, authority used these tech and data to halt travel for activists and ordinary people, and link people's health information to other surveillance and law enforcement tools. And in some cases, the data was even shared with spy agencies. So we did this reporting through poring over documents, terabytes of data, really trying to file public records requests, get new information about all of these different tools and how they impacted communities. And what we found is basically just as what occurred after the September 11th attacks in the United States, it sort of ushered in this new era in which government officials have justification to embed tracking tools in society that are lasting long after coronavirus has sort of ebbed in importance. So what happened? So this is in Israel, a man standing outside the Dome of the Rock. He is showing a text message that civil rights attorneys estimate hundreds of people got in 2021 that says, in Arabic, "You have been spotted as having participated in acts of violence in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We will hold you accountable." And many people, including this worshiper, said they had nothing to do with the unrest that had happened at the Dome of the Rock prior to this text. They just lived or worked in East Jerusalem. And what they didn't know is that the Internal Security Agency, the Shin Bet, had actually been using mass surveillance technology that was mobilized for coronavirus contact tracing against Israeli residents and citizens for purposes completely unrelated to COVID-19. So in Israel for over a year, my colleague Joe Fetterman met with this young man who got the text message, eventually convincing him to talk on the record and be photographed. He was just making coffee. Here he is inside the old city in Jerusalem. This is where he was when he got the text message. He said he had nothing to do with some of the unrest, but he was concerned that the Shin Bet would continue to track him and worried that this really posed a lasting menace for East Jerusalem residents. And as the violence in the same area has continued, some residents have actually continued to receive some similar messages we've heard. In India, we also looked at additional surveillance technologies powered by facial recognition, which again has an AI kind of a makeup, as Lam explained, where local police were tasked with enforcing mask mandates. And what happened to those facial scans was my colleague Kritika Patti found folks in the Muslim communities in Hyderabad who said that they were really worried that they were particularly being singled out to pull down their masks and get their faces scanned, and that data was ultimately being uploaded to a criminal database. Officials told us that they decided whose face they scanned, in part by deciding who they deemed suspicious, which of course stoked fears among privacy advocates and some members of Hyderabad's lower caste communities about the fairness of the application. But we really wanted to make sure that we understood the technology and how it was being deployed. So we actually got access to the police agency itself and had officers run us through exactly how they had deployed facial recognition and then how they mixed that up with other predictive technologies to try to determine who they would follow. Then in China, my colleague Weizhang Wu, who's here, we were looking at the last major country in the world to enforce strict COVID-19 lockdowns, where citizens were required to install some of these cell phone apps like you see to move about freely. And these apps, again, with the same purpose of halting COVID-19, authorities said, were then later used to stop people deemed to be difficult, shall we say, in certain respects, in their tracks. So this is the hands of a woman who has represented Uyghur scholars, activists, Falun Gong practitioners, and Wang Yu, this attorney, former attorney, was grounded for weeks because the color-coded app that she's showing here was not green, meaning that she couldn't leave the city. So we had to analyze this 100-gig database of Chinese procurement contracts to reveal how these technologies used, health, location, credit information to basically derive who, might be of interest. So what we did, I'll just have one last slide here about this story, is we also wanted to show this in a way that's really accessible to our audiences. Again, we have our content seen by half the world's population every day, and so we wanted to write about this presence of AI in all of our lives in a way that was really accessible. So I'll just play a few seconds here of the video that we did.
The city of Hyderabad, India, has become a hotbed of surveillance technology that's only expanded during the COVID-19 pandemic. SQ Masood was heading home when police pulled him over last year. An officer took his photo with a special app, but never said why.
फेशियल रिकग्निशन टेक्नोलॉजी हो या सीसीटीवी कैमरों का जो नेट बिछाया है इन लोगों ने शहर में, ये सारे जो टेक्निकल सॉल्यूशंस जो पुलिस या गवर्नमेंट यूज़ कर रही है, ये बहुत ही डरावनी होती है आम लोगों के लिए.
An Associated Press investigation found that during the pandemic, law enforcement around the world greatly expanded their surveillance arsenal. Tools to help stop the spread of the virus instead have been repurposed.
So we ran, of course, into a lot of methodological challenges. FOIA was certainly imperfect as a way to get after which technologies had actually been implemented during COVID-19, and it varies, of course, from country to country. These technologies, their contracts for these technologies, purchasing orders are not standard or centralized, right? Every institution may obtain them in different ways, often through free trials. And we really wanted to center people's lived experiences, and that is difficult because, of course, communities don't necessarily know when AI tools have been deployed. So I'll offer you a few ideas for how we went about this. As Lam was saying, there's multiple entry points to report on who built, deployed, and then was impacted by the models. All sorts of contracts you can get, even if these tools are not regulated. You want to think about disparate impacts, I would recommend, in looking at AI. Which communities may be particularly affected by these technologies, given the training data. And then also what we really sought to do was seek stories that transcend the individual. So you're not just doing a dry tech tool takeout, but really rather helping the public understand what this means. And so these are some paths forward, I'd suggest. This is also going to be in the tip sheet that we hand out. But you want to think about all of the different kinds of methodologies that you can deploy, as well as be very specific about each tool you're looking at. These are not necessarily generalizable concepts. Each tool you need to be very technically accurate about in order for your reporting to hit hardest. And then finally, we have a little bit of help for you with the AP style book. As Marina mentioned, we just issued a new AI chapter that I led the writing on. It's essentially a set of rules of the road. This is one example of the kind of guidance that you'll find in there, how to get out of this hype cycle and doom cycle and instead focus on the journalistic basics, right? How does it work? Who's impacted? What are the regulatory frameworks? Who's making money, et cetera. So I'll hand it off now to Gabriel to tell you about another fascinating story that he worked on in this vein.
Thanks. Yeah, really good to be talking to you all. I'm here to talk a little bit about our Suspicion Machines investigation, which was a body of work that we took on over the course of a year and a half that examined the deployment of AI in European welfare systems. And we sort of started this investigation with the conviction that AI is increasingly making decisions about people, but one of the most sort of pernicious examples of this is in welfare systems, where AI are making decisions with life-changing consequences for incredibly vulnerable communities. And these systems are sort of pitched as by like large vendors as ways to recover, allegedly lost millions from the public purse. So there's a really punitive undercurrent to the deployment of this technology. So we felt this would be a good sort of scope to take. Reporting has come out so far in the Netherlands, in Denmark, Serbia, and Spain. We have reporting to come elsewhere in Europe in the coming months. And we kind of wanted to tackle this across 4 different axes. So we wanted to be able to grapple with the tech, so essentially audit one of these systems. We wanted to tell the stories of the communities and the people who are most impacted by them. We wanted to examine the political undercurrents that were driving their deployment. So in Europe, discussions around welfare, especially with the rise of sort of xenophobic politics, has increasingly become a proxy for discussions around migration and institutional racism. And we wanted to sort of examine the network of companies that were pitching these tools to governments. And in March, we published a 4-part series in Wired that sort of examines the use of this technology across these 4 different axes. And the centerpiece of that story is a system that was deployed in the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And every year, Rotterdam flags thousands of its welfare recipients for incredibly punitive investigations for fraud. So, you know, there's stories of fraud controllers raiding people's houses at 4 a.m., counting their toothbrushes, sifting through their laundry, and even the smallest mistakes can leave people with cuts to their benefits canceled entirely, in extreme cases, even prosecution. But in 2017, something changed about how the city selected people for these investigations. And what changed was that they deployed a machine learning algorithm to give everyone a score between 0 and 1 of their alleged risk of fraud, and the people with the highest scores were automatically flagged for these really punitive investigations. And in order to calculate this score, this machine learning algorithm gathered 315 data points about each individual. And these data points range from everything from the length of their last romantic relationship, to the number of children they had, to the languages they speak at home, to their struggles with mental health, to social worker comments about their appearance and whether they were motivated. And yeah, used all these things to generate this risk score. And we knew from a relatively early stage that it was using all this data, and it looked really problematic. But the problem was that the city and Accenture, which is a big multinational company that helped build this system, said that it was unbiased. So this is a screenshot from an Accenture white paper where they're saying, talking about Rotterdam, you know, big block letters, advanced analytics plus machine learning equals unbiased citizen outcomes. And the former alderman of the city saying there's no question of bias in inputs or outputs. And this is not a Rotterdam-specific thing. This is something that applies across sort of, you know, the world for places that are deploying these technologies. The statements are always like, okay, this is fairer than analog methods. But the problem is that journalists and other watchdogs are never given the opportunity to actually test these claims. So when we took on this investigation, we wanted to do that, like obtain enough access that we could actually test these claims. And like fast forwarding a year and a half of a very long battle with the city, where I got to know Rotterdam a little too well, we did get that access. So we got access to the algorithm, we got access to the source code, to this machine learning model file that actually produced the risk scores. We got access to the training data and all this documentation around it. And what that enabled us to do was to design an experiment to test for disparate impact. So which groups and which communities were receiving higher scores than others. And it also allows us to pick apart the system and examine the logic of it, which can be really arbitrary and random, and also very prejudiced. And you can see the results of that on the side here. So the system discriminated against young people, parents, women, people who couldn't speak Dutch, which is an obvious proxy for migration status, and then even more so if people fall along multiple axes of these things. And we published a 4-part series with Wired, and then also we worked and published with Verspreton, which is a local Rotterdam Metro paper. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. So how did we actually take this on? So sort of the primary driver was using freedom of information laws, which, like Aaron said, are incredibly imperfect, which is why it took a long time. We carried out community-level, shoe leather reporting with the this Metro paper and a freelancer, you know, we obviously had our data team who was working on sort of reverse engineering the model. So all in all, this is a collaboration across disciplines, you know, across borders and scales of media as well. It's not every day that Wired is working with a local Metro paper. And, you know, we needed to have this type of like cross-disciplinary work. It would have completely fallen apart if we hadn't. So Lam has already talked a little bit about sort of the life cycle of an algorithm. And for us to sort of test the claims that we wanted to test, we needed to think about how do we access different documents across this life cycle. So, you know, what is the variables and data that are going in? What does the training data look like? You know, one thing that we found was that there were only 80 people in the training data, and for it to be representative, it should have been thousands. And yet, being young was the single most determinative variable for the model. You know, what are the sort of like intrinsic, I think, like fairness things that come with using a predictive model? You know, does that like actually align with our bureaucratic norms and values? Does this thing actually work? In Rotterdam's case, it didn't work very well. It was like a 10% improvement on random. And then I think the most sort of important question is fair. Like, is it fair? Does it discriminate? Is there disparate impact? So getting slightly more concrete, you can see here actually the FOIA that we used to get the model in Rotterdam. Hastily translated into English, so hopefully it's okay. And yeah, to get like a little more concrete about actual documents, like one of the things that you couldn't ask for are the variables, right? What is going into this model? But I think one thing that we didn't ask for that I wish we'd asked for at a way earlier stage is something called a data dictionary. So when you get these variables, like there'll be like 5 underscores and it'll make no sense, like time since outflow 12 months. And you're like, what does that mean? And the data dictionary, or like, code book sometimes is what it's called, is a document that describes the database that these systems are pulling from. So we'll say, okay, this is how this variable is constructed. The source code, so how the algorithm is trained. The machine learning model file, which is the most important part. So that's this trained model file that you give it data and it produces a score. So that was the biggest sort of battle for us. You know, you can ask for evaluation documentation because data scientists within these agencies are evaluating their models all the time to see if they're working. You know, manuals are really helpful. Training data, which in Europe is impossible to get because of GDPR, and we got kind of a lucky break where we asked Rotterdam for like statistics describing their training data, and they accidentally, in that file, leaked the entire training data set. So a bit of a stroke of luck there, but you know, what you can ask for is things like more descriptive statistics. How many men, how many women are in this training data? You know, from what neighborhoods are people in this training data? And that you can get, in a GDPR compliant way. But, you know, there was obviously this really long struggle to get the model, and like, you know, there was potential court case and, you know, tons of in-person meetings with Rotterdam, like trying to push this through. But in parallel to that, and just as difficult, was really like finding the human dimension to this story. So people in the context of welfare who are selected for these investigations feel incredibly, there's a sense of shame, there's a sense of understandable distrust towards institutions, including the media. And sort of building that trust took a lot of time and a lot of in-person time and connecting with those communities and working with reporters who were already connected with those communities. So, you know, it's just as important and I think just as difficult as sort of this technical access. Like Aaron said, one of the things as well that challenges is nobody knows if they've been selected because of an algorithm or why. I mean, it's really rare that people are actually told something like that. So one concrete suggestion I can give in the European context is using subject access requests. So under European data protection laws, people can send in requests for their data, and that's what we did. So we had people ask for the variables that have been used to calculate their score and their risk score, and I think it also ended up being a powerful storytelling device. You can see a screenshot here of the data someone received back, and you can see that their history of depression had been used, had been inputted into the model, and the fact that they spoke Turkish at home. So where does collaboration come in? Like I said, we worked with, First Baton, this local media, and I think having that strong local context knowledge was essential to this project. And I think I would really recommend working with local media also because they continue the story once the big media have left. So one of the things that I'm really happy to see is First Baton continue on this story and to, publishing soon a big explain around the political decision making of why they decided to use this algorithm. And, being able to reach the people most affected, right? Most people in Rotterdam are not reading Wired magazine. Then when it comes to as well, collaboration, for us it was really important to bulletproof this project. This type of access to machine learning model is like quite new in journalism, and we really wanted to get it right. So we, first of all, wrote a methodology, which I wish we had done from the very start. Instead, we started when we were already running our experiment, which was a bad idea. So don't do that. And then we took that methodology to a panel that we created of academics who then essentially like peer reviewed it. And that's one thing to sort of point out as well is like, don't reinvent the wheel. Like there are a bunch of academics who are thinking about this topic and really, spending all their time on it. You don't have to come up with the methodology completely by yourself, or if you don't have the like exact statistical knowledge about like machine learning, you're just a data team, that capacity exists out there, and we were, academics were incredibly grateful to sort of donate their time for that, but they're also looking for new case studies themselves, which is something to always keep in mind. And, just to sort of talk about like a few lessons learned, I think Marina put it really well at the start. These stories are not tech stories, they're system stories, and I think you should let that lead. For the Wired thing, we tried to tell a larger story about the deployment of these systems across the continent. And those stories look very different from each other. So one of them is very technical, but another one is just a zoom in on the politics. And that's, I think, something you can take away as well. There's a bunch of different constellations of what a good AI story can look like, and you don't need to have like crazy technical access in order to tell those stories well. And like in the end, we didn't have like an AI specialist on our team. We didn't need that. What we needed is a multidisciplinary team, combining data journalists with people who, understood the communities that were affected well, people who could sort of help bring us like a wider narrative to an audience. And yeah, so like Marina said, I think you can all be AI journalists in this room, and yeah, hope you take more of this work on.
Thank you so much. Take it away, Lam.
Hi, oh yeah, I need to have this too. Okay, well, let's go to this picture up here. Do you see this doorbell up there? It says ring.
Yeah.
Who here is aware of what this is? Hands up. All right. So for some of you who have never seen these have become a very popular device in the US. You can ring the doorbell, and there's a tiny camera in there that's connected to your phone, and you can see wherever it is. I spoke to a person who has 10 of them in their whole house. And attached to that ring camera is also a social platform called Neighbors, where people who see suspicious activity in their backyard can post about that. Now, imagine this company, Ring, which is owned by Amazon, having 2,600 partnerships with police across the country. And each of these police departments, police officers can sign up for a service that then automatically alerts them about these supposed crimes that they see. And so what we now have is this automated alert system about crime that informs police officers about what a lot of people consider a crime, but maybe is not necessarily that. And so we wanted to better understand this. About 2019, 2018, there were a lot of different institutions that kind of documented that these partnerships existed. But we wanted to better get at the texture of this. What are the signals that are being sent on social media to police, oftentimes without the knowledge of the people who posted this information to that then determine how we interpret the health of a community, the safety of a community. And if you think about it this way, crime has become a flashpoint, a political flashpoint in many, many elections for the US. And I presume to some degree the kind of paranoia that came up on these platforms might have infiltrated other places too. Especially, I've been told that in the UK, for example, this is also a big issue on these platforms. So we did 3 stories for this that are not, please do not take a picture of these. The stories have not, no, please. The stories have not run yet, and you are all now sworn to secrecy. But luckily enough, they still wanted me to talk about this. But for the first story, we wanted to better understand who the people are who post on these platforms and what kind of information is posted up there. A wonderful scholar, Dan Kalachi, and his colleagues Jeffrey Chen and Alex Pentland, they had scraped through a hidden API 870,000 posts from everyday users across the country. So my package was stolen, and oh my gosh, there's a person in the backyard was collected in a wonderful, long, big spreadsheet and was passed on to me in safe hands. And through an analysis where we joined this data with other demographics data, we found that richer neighborhoods posted 6 times the rate than poorer neighborhoods. And we also did a crime analysis and saw that richer neighborhoods did not necessarily experience more crime to necessitate all of this posting. So what we saw was a misinformation crisis that was being directly funneled to police. Suddenly, the woes and the concerns of the richest people became everyone's social problems, or at least were presented as that. And so what this also did is some of the information that we were able to see is that there's a lot of racial gatekeeping that happened on these platforms. Oftentimes, the people who were being alerted as not belonging to a neighborhood were Black, were Latino, and often also homeless, right? And what you see is a discomfort being expressed on social platforms that was then coded as a crime and forwarded to police to better understand their neighborhood and community. The second story we did, we are doing, is about what that looks like for police. Imagine one cop who received 10,000 emails over the course of 1.6 years, right? One day, this man got 63 emails in his inbox, a third of them about package theft, or as one message proclaimed in all caps, porch pirate, right? So this gives you an idea of like just how inundated a lot of police officers are with this information. In LA, there were 202,000 emails. We are now getting it from the NYPD, after LA. They had 385,000 emails in their inboxes, and they had only signed up in November. Like, that gives you an understanding of, this is a weird belief that technology will deliver you great information, something oftentimes seen as techno-solutionism, right? Technology will solve it all, but then actually has the opposite effect and actually skews the ways in which we see what's happening in the world. And a lot of these emails, even though they're proclaimed to be about crime, yes, I had to read through thousands of neighbors' posts. A third of them actually didn't detail the crime. And so a lot of biases, a lot of social biases, classist biases, and racial biases were suddenly passed on to police. That is going to mess with the way in which you see the world around you, right? Last but not least, one of the things that we wanted to do that I have seen in my reporting a lot, I would talk to someone and be like, Gabriel, how do you feel about your data privacy, right? And like you and I, we don't feel that great, but imagine going to an everyday consumer who is constantly bombarded with sad information. One of the things that I saw was people really wanted information that they can act upon. And so we put together a simple consumer guide to help you protect your packages, because theft is a thing. And so we looked into how to protect your packages and your ethics at the same time. And so these are the 3 packages, each aimed at a different audience, right, that we wanted to do. So on to the methods. Every aspect of this project was collaborative. I happen to be someone who loves community and loves being in community with other people. So I dragged along my students, I dragged along academics, I dragged along lawyers, and these are some of the methods that we used. So we all know FOIA is a horrible tool that sometimes gives you good information. What we did was put together a FOIA, a public records audit. Has anyone ever heard of this? Hands up. Oh, you can learn something new. Okay, a public records audit is the process of sending the same request to different jurisdictions to test how much a jurisdiction will comply with public records laws. And it's also a way for you to get information. For this particular one, I deployed 5 of my students to figure out how to do this. And the reason why we wanted to do this was that we wanted to, sure, like any journalist, we wanted to unearth new information. We also wanted to put together a contact list of all the police department, of 25 police departments across the country, so that people like Garance, if you want to, can go and see who they should talk to. I wanted to teach my students how to use soft diplomacy, or as I call it, the demeanor of an aggressive soccer mom. Very friendly, but consistent, to get the records that they wanted, and to help better ways to communicate with FOI officers. If it's hard for us who cover this stuff to understand technology, imagine a police officer being like, what do you want? Data, EML files, MBOX files, what are those? Oh, they are email files and so on. So I trained all of my students who are up here, my wonderful students, please hire them, to ask to send the same request for this type of email. These are the emails that these police officers would get. It would be like, there was a crime reported in your neighborhood. This is the approximate location. It was a porch pirate, right? And the key to this type of information and why it should work as a FOIA audit was that this did not include any personally identifying information about the people who posted, which made it fair game, right? It's anonymous information. Just give it to me, right? And so this was the argument that we had a lot. In this FOIA audit, thanks to the AI Accountability Network, I was able to A, pay my students, B, get a lot of legal advice from the Reporters Committee for Press Freedom, and I would highly recommend to look for First Amendment clinics at universities or nonprofits that look into the First Amendment law, right? Was the First Amendment? The FOIA laws, anyway. Yeah, but yes. And that was really, really helpful. So within this process, my students communicated with each other on signal groups, and we all learned from each other on what methods worked. And I was able to problem solve with them. We all filed it from the same email address, which meant that if someone had to like kind of tag out, I could tag in and help a little bit, help out a little bit. And I put together a bunch of documents so that they could track what happens, could document what happens, so that we can share it in a later piece that you can read in a month. So just subscribe to the Markup newsletter. Number 2, we did do a lot of data scraping from these emails, which was a mega pain, and analyses, and turning documents like .pst folders, which is the output folder of Microsoft Office, right? Outlook. Do you think Microsoft Office Outlook has a wonderful interface and great data? Not so much, but it was extremely messy. Sometimes it would take 1 to 2 hours to go through 32 gigabytes of data of scraping, but I got a lot of help from different data coaches, from other data journalists. Data journalism is so new that everyone seems to be very communicative and like very collaborative and very kind and generous with their time. So I'm not the most generous, no, but there's many others. Then there are, of course, statisticians. If you're based in the US, and maybe even if you're not based in the US, there's this wonderful website run by the American Association of Statisticians, I think it's, or ASA, American Statistician Association, and you can literally type into a little form, I need help with data. And the next day, I got an email back, and a statistician was sitting down with me and telling me how to do statistical testing, right? And then, as Gabe mentioned, methodologies, they are your Bible. They are a pain in the neck to write, but they clearly lay out your methodology, how you analyzed it, what your assumptions were, what the shortfalls are of the data, not just for you, but also for other journalists and your editors. The type of journalism and data journalism that you do on this level can be quite in the weeds, and the more you are able to articulate that to others, the better you can equip anyone who's helping you with the story and anyone who's reading the story to either replicate what you do or to better understand it and formulate it, right? Number 3, talking to people. So finding real people is hard. And sometimes you might be surprised at how you can find a lot of human beings in data. So one of the things that we had to do was to write a script to find out how many posts of the 202,000 emails included someone's telephone number, because we wanted to talk to someone whose information was forwarded. Sure, I could go to a neighborhood where there's a lot of neighbors' posts, but there's something powerful about going to someone and being like, I did an investigation. Did you know that the thing that you posted in February was forwarded to police? And that opens up a conversation. You give them new information, they give you their take on that, and they can give you a bigger understanding of where they situate themselves in this particular platform. And yes, I cold texted 24 different people who had accidentally put their telephone number into the posts. And I was able to talk to 2 people in Los Angeles about this. So in terms of, wait, was this it? I think so. So in terms of storytelling and distribution, this was also something that I thought about a lot. For me, the ways in which tech investigations sometimes fail, and I don't think you guys do this, but is the idea of like always trying to cover Elon Musk and what he's doing and what Mark Zuckerberg is doing, and that doesn't help any of you in this room. And yet all of us are reliant on technology in some way or another, right? I see all the phones, don't deny it, right? And so for me, I've often thought about who is this reporting for? And I've always thought about systems. And so one of the reasons why I covered this story was because people across the country, every time I went for a breaking news story and started talking to a Black community, to a Latino community, to a poorer community, all of them said that they felt pushed out of their neighborhoods and felt like government institutions were aiding that, right? And were automatically, we're doing this in the same vein. And if you think about these platforms, Nextdoor, Citizen, and all of the and neighbors as well, on them, there's so much racial gatekeeping that then says, this Black person does not belong in my community, and that then might get reinforced and enforced by police, right? The police becomes an extension of what is being phrased on these platforms. And so with that in mind, one of the things that often happens is that, I think I've heard this a lot during this conference, so I'm actually quite happy, is that our journalism sometimes should not just be read by the elite folks who are reading Wired magazine, but we need to make sure that everyone else is also included, especially the people who already serve and have the trust of the communities most impacted by these stories. There's a wonderful organization at CUNY called the Center for Community Media, and they had a Black Media Initiative. So when I gave the woman who runs this institution a list of 25 cities where, for which we had gotten data or looked into police partnerships with Ring, she immediately gave me the names and email addresses of 25 different news organizations in these places that were owned by Black folks who also served a Black audience. So one of our main neighbors is actually, one of our main partners is actually Afro-LA, a small institution that is managed by, run by, and reported by Black community members for LA. And that was really important to us. And not only did we do that, we really wanted to have their voice included as well. And so as you mentioned, it's not just about us, it's about empowering and giving people a voice who have been there, who have done that work, and who deserve to also be heard within this. And then in the future, one of my favorite things is to talk to teenagers and to people who might be implicated through some of these posts, right? So we were thinking about potentially doing more in-person events as this story develops, in large part because a lot of the organizations that we talk to have already plugged into those kinds of communities. Yeah. I think that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been really impressive. So yes, clap. And because these folks are so impressive, I hope that your level of intimidation with this beat and this story is not going up, because we want to bring it down. And so I want to remind you that Lam worked with students. I want to remind you that Gabriel said that he didn't have an AI reporter in his team, even though they did all those reverse engineering of things. And I want to remind you that Garance involved a host of partners from the AP who probably never had reported on these kind of stories before. So yes, you belong, and this is a story that is unavoidable for all of us. And on that theme, and before we go on questions, please get your questions flowing. I want to ask each of you, and along this line, what is your advice for journalists who are starting in the field of AI reporting? What are the 1, 2, 3, or one tip? What is the first thing they need to do? And also, how do they start finding the most strategic or important stories that are to be told in their communities?
Sure. Thank you so much, Marina. It's such exciting work to hear about. So I wanted to say we also had some other collaborators, some students at UC Berkeley who are experts in open source investigation, and they comb through thousands of social media posts to help us identify some of the communities where we wanted to go deeper in Hyderabad, and that was invaluable. We also worked with the Starling Lab for Data Integrity at Stanford to help us do some authentication around some of those posts. Super grateful to Pulitzer Center and the Starling Lab for funding some of our work. But I think that the idea we're all sort of getting at here is that collaboration makes us stronger. These are really difficult stories. They're at the intersection of, civil rights, transparency, and very, very technical reporting on sometimes models that even the people who build them can't adequately explain to you because they become so complex over time. So I think really becoming familiar with these terms first, AP Style Books, a resource, there are many others out there, so that you can get your own, specific set of knowledge and grounding in these concepts, and then beginning to see who else in your community, in your area of coverage has also delved into AI a bit, and think about collaborations would be a first place to start. But I also think that for this, looking at AI as everyone's story is really important. I know that in the United States, for example, the nonprofit EPIC just came out with a guide of many, many different government agencies that have implemented AI in recent years. And so looking at that, looking at the website algorithm tips that Nick Diakopoulos compiled will just help you sort of steep yourself in how present these tools already are, and I hope give you ideas for jumping off points for new stories with your newfound collaborators.
Yeah, I think Karen's put it really well. I think in terms of finding leads, I think let the context lead you to a story, because if you just kind of throw a stone, you'll find an AI system somewhere. So for Garen's, it was the COVID-19 pandemic was a sort of like leading context. One of the stories that we did that I didn't talk about today was about an algorithm used in Spain in the social services there. And the sort of like leading context there was the social services, which are incredibly underfunded, crumbling, and the agency sort of starts implementing a new algorithm from SAS, and this is seen as like the solution to a crumbling social security system, and that was like our lead into the story. So I think if you can let context lead you to the system and not the other way around, although you can go the other way around, I think that's a really useful entry point, because it also gives you a frame immediately. I think that was something I struggled with a lot, was like I kind of lost sight of what the frame is here, like why are we doing this, and had to be reminded many times by my editor staring at me in the front row and giggling. So yeah, I think that's the advice I'd give.
I go back to the idea of just understanding the basics about the plumbing, right? Understanding how it works. And I will tell you that can actually sometimes be annoyingly hard, because in the space of technology, there are a lot of what Karen's probably sees in her backyard in San Francisco a lot. The bro-grammer. The programmer who is a bit of a bro and will probably talk to you in jargon and not explain it to you. And so I want to give you 1 or 2, 3 books as a professor. I'm going to give you a reading list that might be really helpful. The most empathetic explanatory scholar on this, I think, is Meredith Broussard. She wrote a book called More Than a Glitch, and it's one of the kindest guides that I've read in a long time about this kind of work. If you want to see it at work in terms of just understanding beautiful stories around of the people who have been impacted by AI, Automating Inequality might be a great book for you. And then just a small thing, especially if you're talking to different communities, one of my favorite grassroots level project around that was The People's Guide to AI by Mimi Ono Oha. I will tweet after this so that you don't have to do this.
Awesome.
Writing down.
I love it. And Meredith Broussard, before this glitch, what is the name? More Than a Glitch book, she wrote another one called Artificial Unintelligence, How Computers Misunderstand the World. That was the first book I read on AI, and it kind of completely opened my mind to the topic.